Welcome to the English Talk community. I'm Julia, and I'm truly glad you're here with me. Whether this is your first time listening or you've been part of our journey for a while, I want you to know that this space was created with you in mind. This is a place for people from all over the world who are learning English, not just as a school subject or a job requirement, but as a way to grow, connect, and express themselves in new and meaningful ways. And I want to start this conversation not by giving you a rule or a list, but by sharing something even more important, a mindset. Because before we dive into vocabulary or practice speaking, we need to pause for a moment and talk about how we think about learning. I believe that mindset is everything. It's what allows us to keep going when things feel difficult. It helps us find joy in the small wins. And most of all, it reminds us that progress doesn't have to be perfect. In fact, it never is. So if you've ever felt frustrated because your English isn't good enough, or because you make mistakes, or because you don't feel confident yet, just know that you are not alone. Every single person in this community has felt the same way at some point. Even the most fluent speakers started where you are now, and that's exactly why we're here, to grow together. Let's talk about consistency. You've probably heard that word before, and maybe it sounds a little boring, but it's actually one of the most powerful tools you have. Consistency doesn't mean studying for hours every day or being perfect. It means showing up again and again in small, meaningful ways. It means listening to English while you make breakfast, reading a short article before bed, thinking of one or two sentences in English as you walk to work. It's those little habits, repeated over time, that build fluency, not overnight, not in a week, but gradually, like watering a plant and watching it grow. And the truth is, learning a language is a long journey. So why not make it enjoyable? That brings me to another important part of our mindset: lightness. I want you to know that it's okay to laugh at your mistakes. It's okay to speak slowly. It's okay if you forget a word or say something a little strange. That's all part of the process. In this community, we don't chase perfection. We celebrate effort. We honor the courage it takes to speak in a new language, even when it feels uncomfortable. We give ourselves permission to try, to explore, to play with language, and to be proud of every step forward, no matter how small. Sometimes people think that learning English has to be stressful, that it's all about memorizing difficult grammar, rules, passing exams, or avoiding mistakes. But that's not how real learning happens. Real learning happens when you're curious, when you're interested, when you hear a new word and you want to use it because it sounds fun, when you understand something in a movie and smile to yourself, when you have a conversation, even a simple one, and you realize, hey, I just said that in English. That's the kind of learning that lasts. That's the kind of learning that builds confidence from the inside out. And confidence doesn't come from knowing every single word. It comes from giving yourself the freedom to speak, even when you don't know all the words. It comes from showing up consistently, from being kind to yourself, and from remembering that it's okay not to be perfect. In fact, it's better. Because that means you're real, you're human, and you're learning in the most honest way possible. So as we move forward together, I want you to carry this mindset with you. You don't need to be perfect. You just need to keep going. Show up for yourself in small ways. Take breaks when you need to. Laugh when things get messy. And remember that you're not doing this alone. This is a community of learners just like you. Some are beginners, some are intermediate, some are fluent, but we all share the same goal: to connect through language, to grow together, and to make English part of our lives in a way that feels real and empowering. This is not a competition. There's no race, no finish line, only steps. And every step counts. Every time you listen to this podcast, every time you repeat a sentence out loud, every time you think in English, even just a little, that's progress. And progress is what we're here for. When you shift your mindset from pressure to possibility, everything changes. Suddenly, learning English becomes less about proving yourself and more about discovering what you're capable of. You start to enjoy the process, not just the results. You start to notice your own growth, even in the moments that feel slow. And that's where the real transformation happens. Not just in your vocabulary, but in your confidence, your attitude, and your ability to keep moving forward. So as you listen to this podcast, as you read, write, think, and speak in English, Try to approach it with lightness, with curiosity, with the belief that you are capable of more than you think. And remember, it's not about how fast you go. It's about showing up day after day with an open heart and a willing mind. There will be days when English feels easy and fun, and there will be days when it feels confusing or slow. Both are part of the journey. Both are valuable. Both teach you something. So don't be discouraged by the hard moments. Don't measure your worth by your mistakes. You're learning a whole new system of communication. And that takes time. It takes patience. It takes courage. And you have all of that inside you. I created this community because I believe that people learn best when they feel supported, understood, and inspired. When they feel like they belong. And you do belong here. You belong in this space, in this conversation, in this journey. You have something to say, something to share, something to learn. And we are here to support you every step of the way. So take a breath. Relax your shoulders. Let go of the pressure. You are exactly where you need to be. This is your time to grow, to learn, and to explore English in a new way. Not just one of the most important shifts in your English learning journey is learning how to think in English. This may sound like a big step, but it's actually something that starts in small ways and grows with time and intention. I remember clearly the moment I realized that thinking in English wasn't just a trick or a fancy skill, it was the key to unlocking real fluency. You see, for most learners, the biggest challenge isn't memorizing vocabulary or understanding grammar rules. It's the time it takes to respond. That pause, that moment when your brain is busy translating from your native language into English is where fluency gets stuck. When you think in English, you cut out that delay. You reduce the mental back and forth that happens when you try to translate every word before you speak. And this makes a huge difference, because real conversations don't wait. They move quickly, naturally. People don't speak in slow, clear sentences like in a textbook. They speak with emotion, with rhythm, with slang, and sometimes with mistakes. If your brain is still trying to translate while someone else is talking, you're already one step behind. But when you start thinking directly in English, your mind becomes more agile. You respond faster, you understand more, and you feel more connected to the flow of the conversation. Let me tell you something I've observed over and over again with students from different countries and different backgrounds. The ones who start thinking in English, even just in short moments during the day, are the ones who make the most noticeable progress. They stop depending so much on their native language. They start building stronger connections between English words and real-life situations. And it shows in the way they speak, listen, and even feel when using English. Thinking in English doesn't mean you have to do it all the time right away. It starts with little steps. When you look at your phone, try to describe what you see in English. When you're cooking, think about the ingredients and actions in English. Chop the onions, boil the water. When you're walking outside, notice the weather, the people, the sounds, and try to form simple English sentences in your head. These are private moments, quiet practices. No one hears you, but they are powerful. Because they train your brain to associate English with your daily life. And when English becomes part of how you think, it naturally becomes easier to speak. This also helps you avoid one of the biggest mistakes learners make: depending too much on translation. I've seen students freeze during a conversation, not because they didn't know what to say, but because they were trying to translate a word or phrase from their language into English, and it didn't fit perfectly. Languages don't work like that. One word in your native language might have many different meanings in English, or sometimes there's no exact match at all. That's why translation often slows you down, confuses you, or makes your speech sound unnatural. But when you think directly in English, you stop searching for the perfect equivalent. You start expressing ideas in a simpler, more natural way. It's also important to remember that thinking in English is not just about words. It's about patterns, expressions, and rhythm. When you're able to think in short phrases like, I'm going to, it looks like, maybe later, I don't think so, you're already building the structure of fluent conversation. You're practicing how real English sounds, not just the vocabulary, but the music of the language. This helps you speak with more confidence, and it helps others understand you more easily. There's another benefit I want to share with you. When you stop translating and start thinking in English, you actually reduce anxiety. It might sound strange, but it's true. Many learners feel nervous when speaking English because they're trying to do too many things at once. Listen, translate, think of the correct grammar, find the right word, speak. That's a lot of pressure. But when you start thinking in English, the process becomes more natural. It becomes more automatic. You're no longer doing two jobs, thinking in one language and speaking in another. You're doing just one thing, communicating. And that feels lighter, more relaxed. It's a bit like learning to ride a bike. In the beginning, you focus on every movement, your balance, your hands, your feet. But once you've practiced enough, your body remembers what to do. You ride without thinking about it. Thinking in English is like that. At first, it feels strange and you might have to remind yourself to do it. But over time, it becomes automatic. You no longer stop to ask yourself, how do I say this in English? Because you're already thinking in English from the start. This mindset also helps you become more aware of how English is used in real life. When you think in English, you begin to notice expressions, phrasal verbs, and sentence structures that you might have ignored before. You pay attention to how people really speak, not just the grammar rules you learned in school, but the living, breathing language that's used every day. And the more you notice, the more you absorb. One small exercise I love to recommend is to describe your day in English, in your head, as it's happening. I'm brushing my teeth, I'm making coffee, I need to check my messages. These are simple phrases, but they reflect your real life. And when you use English to describe your own experience, it sticks with you much more than a list of random vocabulary. It becomes meaningful. It becomes yours. Another simple strategy is to ask yourself questions in English. What do I want to eat? Why am I feeling tired today? What do I need to do next? These internal questions, spoken silently, in your mind help train your thinking in English without pressure. You don't need perfect grammar. You don't need anyone else around. You just need a few quiet moments to practice turning your thoughts into English. I've worked with many learners who told me that this shift, thinking in English, was the thing that finally made everything feel more natural. They stopped relying on long translations. They started speaking more easily, they felt less afraid of making mistakes, and most importantly, they began to enjoy using English more. Because when your thoughts are in English, the language stops being something you study and becomes something you live. Thinking in English also helps your listening. When you hear someone speak and your brain is already used to English sentence patterns, you recognize meaning faster. You understand the intent behind the words, not just the words themselves. You don't waste time trying to translate what you hear. You just understand it. That's real fluency. That's when language becomes connection. And this connection grows stronger every time you practice. Every time you choose to think, even for a minute. In English, you are training your brain to communicate more efficiently. You're rewiring the way you use language. And that kind of practice adds up day after day. It doesn't have to be complicated. You don't need special materials. All you need is your mind, your attention, and the willingness to try. So if you've never tried thinking in English before, start small. Choose one activity, maybe while you're getting ready in the morning or while walking home, and talk to yourself silently in English. It doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be real. The more you do this, the more natural it becomes. And one day, you'll catch yourself thinking in English without even trying. That's when you'll know that something powerful has shifted. I want to talk honestly about something that many English learners experience but don't always share out loud. The deep frustration that comes when you can understand English but can't express yourself the way you want to. I've heard this so many times from people around the world. People who've studied for years, who can read and even write in English fairly well, but when it's time to speak, something blocks them. It's like the words are sitting there, right at the edge of their mind, but they just won't come out. And when they do, they don't sound right. They come slowly. They feel unnatural. And it's exhausting. I remember working with a learner from Brazil. Her name was Anna. She told me she loved English. She listened to music, watched movies, even followed international news in English. But every time she had to speak, especially with native speakers, she would freeze. Her mind would feel slow, like everything was happening in slow motion. She described it as a kind of fog. She knew the words, but in those moments, she couldn't find them. Her brain was searching, scanning through a list of vocabulary, and nothing would come in time. The conversation would move on, and she would be left behind, silent, frustrated, sometimes embarrassed. That experience is not rare. It's actually very common. Many learners go through this, and the worst part is not just the language difficulty, it's the emotional weight that comes with it. You start to doubt yourself. You wonder, what's wrong with me? I've studied so much. Why is this still so hard? That self-doubt can be heavy. It can make you avoid speaking opportunities. It can make you stay quiet in meetings or in social situations because you're afraid of making mistakes or sounding less intelligent than you really are. And here's something else I've heard over and over again. Learners saying they feel mentally slow when they try to speak. Not in general, just in English. It's like their brain slows down, their confidence drops, and suddenly, even simple thoughts feel hard to say. That's because speaking a language is not just about knowledge. It's about speed, flow, and mental flexibility. And those things only come with practice. But when you're constantly feeling blocked, it's hard to even get to that practice. Let me tell you about another learner, this time from Egypt. His name was Kareem. He was an engineer, very smart, and used English for work every day, emails, reports, technical documents. But when he had to speak during video calls, he felt stuck. He said it was like walking through thick mud. Every sentence took effort. Every answer felt delayed. He said he hated the long pauses, the constant while searching for the next word. And he hated the way people looked at him during those silences. Even though no one said anything, he felt judged. And that made it worse. The pressure grew, the fear of speaking increased, and he avoided situations where he had to speak English live. This feeling of hesitation, of being mentally blocked, is something I take seriously. Because I know it's not about intelligence. It's not about effort. These learners are dedicated. They've studied, they've practiced, they've tried. But speaking is different. Speaking brings out fears that don't show up when you're reading or writing. When you're speaking, you're exposed. You're visible. You have to perform in real time. And that creates anxiety, even for people who are confident in other areas of their lives. And it's not just professionals. I've heard similar stories from students, from parents, from travelers, from artists. One student from South Korea, Minji, told me how frustrated she felt during her exchange program in the US. She understood everything in class. She could follow lectures, take notes, even pass exams with good grades. But in group discussions, she felt invisible. Every time she tried to speak, her voice felt small. She couldn't find the right tone, the right expressions. She knew what she wanted to say in Korean. But by the time she tried to say it in English, the group had moved on. She felt left out. She began to participate less, not because she had nothing to say, but because she couldn't say it in time. This experience creates a kind of mental fatigue. You're constantly thinking, constantly monitoring yourself, checking your grammar, your pronunciation, your vocabulary. It's like driving with the brakes on. You can't relax, you can't enjoy the ride. And that pressure makes your brain even slower. It becomes a loop. You feel stuck, you hesitate, and then you criticize yourself for hesitating, which makes you even more stuck. I've seen this cycle so many times. There's also the emotional side that people don't always talk about. The shame, the frustration, the disappointment. Some learners feel like they're not living up to their potential. Others feel isolated, especially if they live in an English-speaking country and struggle to connect with people around them. One learner told me he felt like two different versions of himself, one in his native language, where he was funny, confident, and expressive, and another in English, where he felt basic, awkward, and small. That contrast is painful. It makes people feel like they've lost part of who they are. And yet, all of this is more common than most people think. You're not alone if you've ever felt this way. The truth is, these struggles are part of the process. They don't mean you're doing something wrong. They don't mean you're not good at languages. They just mean you've reached a stage where speaking out loud is now the next real challenge. And that's okay. It's normal to feel slower when your brain is adapting to a new way of communicating. It's normal to hesitate when you're stepping into something that feels unfamiliar, and it's normal to feel emotional about it, because language is emotional. It's how we connect, how we express who we are. When that feels blocked, of course it's frustrating. I've had conversations with learners who were on the edge of giving up. They had tried so many methods, apps, and courses, but they still felt stuck when speaking. One learner from Italy told me he was tired of hearing, "Don't be afraid to make mistakes." He said, "I'm not afraid of mistakes. I'm afraid of not being understood. I'm afraid of people thinking I'm not smart. I'm tired of sounding like a beginner when I'm not." And I understood him. Because it's not just about learning, it's about identity. It's about wanting to be seen and understood as you really are. When learners hit this wall, they often start to lose motivation. They say things like, "Maybe I'm too old to learn," or "Maybe I'm just not talented with languages." But none of that is true. What they really need is a shift, a new way to approach speaking, one that focuses on reducing pressure, building fluency gradually, and accepting that speaking is a skill that takes time to grow. Because these struggles, as frustrating as they are, also mean that you're pushing yourself. You're stepping out of your comfort zone. You're trying to make English a living part of your daily life, and that is something to respect. These real stories, Anna, Kareem, Minji, and so many others, remind me every day why I do what I do. Because behind every grammar mistake, behind every pause or hesitation, there is a person who wants to be understood. There is a voice trying to come out. And even if it's slow at first, that voice deserves the space to grow. One thing I hear all the time from English learners is this idea that thinking in English is something only advanced speakers or native speakers can do. People say it with a kind of distance, like it's a skill that's out of reach unless you've already mastered grammar, vocabulary, pronunciation, and everything else. It's as if thinking in English is the finish line of fluency, something reserved for experts. But I want to tell you honestly and clearly that this belief is completely false. Thinking in English is not just for experts. It's not some magical thing that happens only after years and years of perfect study. It's something you can begin developing right now, even if you're at a beginner or intermediate level. Let me explain why this myth exists in the first place. Many learners grow up being taught English in very traditional ways, memorizing vocabulary lists, translating sentences, repeating dialogues that don't feel real, and focusing so much on rules that there's no space left for natural thought. So when they hear the phrase "think in English," they immediately feel intimidated. They imagine that to think in English, they have to be perfect. They believe they need to have full fluency, flawless grammar, and a native-like accent first. But that's not how the brain works. That's not how languages work. In fact, thinking in English is not a result of fluency. It's a path to fluency. I remember speaking with a learner from Vietnam named Lynn. She told me she always felt that thinking in English was for real English speakers and not for someone like her. But when I asked her what she meant by real, she said, "People who can speak fast and naturally, without mistakes." That definition is so common, but also so damaging, because it places fluency at the end of a long staircase and makes learners feel like they're always at the bottom. But the truth is, Lynn was already doing more than she gave herself credit for. She understood most of what she read. She could have conversations, even if they weren't perfect. She had the tools to begin thinking in English. She just didn't. Believe she was qualified. This is the mindset I want to change. Thinking in English is not about perfection. It's about practice. It's about building new habits, little by little, in your daily life. It's something that becomes easier the more you try, not the more rules you memorize. And more importantly, it's something that every learner can access, whether you're just beginning or you've been studying for years. You don't need a native environment. You don't need a perfect accent. You just need a willingness to stop translating everything in your head and start trusting your brain to connect thoughts in English, even if those thoughts are simple at first. One of the biggest myths is that native speakers are somehow born thinking in English. But the truth is, they had to learn just like anyone else. The only difference is that they learned through immersion, through life, not textbooks. They learned through trial and error, repetition, and constant exposure. And that process is available to you too, even if you live in a non-English speaking country. The internet, podcasts, videos, books, and conversations online all make it possible for you to surround yourself with English. It's not about where you live, it's about what you do with the resources you have. I also want to talk about the idea that thinking in English is something that happens only after you know enough vocabulary. Many learners feel like they need to wait until they've memorized thousands of words before they can even try. But here's what I've seen over and over again. The learners who start thinking in English early, even with basic vocabulary, actually grow their fluency faster. Why? Because they stop relying on translation. They allow their brain to make direct connections between ideas and the English words for those ideas. Even if they start with simple sentences like "I am hungry" or "today is a good day," those simple thoughts form a foundation. From there, everything else can grow. There was a learner from Morocco, Omar, who was still at a beginner level when I met him. He didn't believe he could think in English because he felt his vocabulary was too limited. But I asked him to try something for 1 week. I told him, every time you walk into a room, name 3 things you see in English. Every time you're getting dressed, describe what you're wearing. Every time you feel something, happy, tired, stressed, just say it to yourself in English. It wasn't perfect, and sometimes he had to check a dictionary. But within 2 weeks, he was forming small thoughts automatically. He told me it was like a door had opened in his brain. And that's what thinking in English really is. It's opening a door and allowing your brain to walk through. Another thing that holds people back is the fear of mistakes. They think, if I think in English and make a mistake, I'll reinforce the wrong sentence. But thinking is not the same as final speaking. You can think freely without pressure. You can play with words, experiment, and learn from the process. And when you do speak, you'll find that the ideas are already there, waiting for you. Thinking is your practice ground. It's where you develop confidence and flexibility. You don't need permission to start. You just need to give yourself space to try. One of the most inspiring things I've witnessed is how learners from completely different backgrounds, different countries, different native languages, different ages, have been able to shift their mindset and begin thinking in English. A 60-year-old grandmother from Spain, a 14-year-old student from Thailand, a truck driver from Poland. None of them were experts. None of them had perfect grammar. But they decided to treat English not as a subject to study, but as a language to live. And once they made that shift, everything started to change. They stopped asking, "How do I translate this?" and started asking, "How would I say this in English using what I already know?" That small change led to big results. Thinking in English is not about speaking fast. It's not about sounding like someone else. It's about making English your own. It's about using the language to express your thoughts as they are, in real time, without going through the filter of translation. And that is something you can start practicing right now. No one needs to give you a certificate. No one needs to say you're ready. You can start by narrating your day. You can start by labeling your emotions. You can start by making grocery lists in English. You can think about what you're going to cook, or what time your next meeting is, or what you want to watch on TV, all in English. This kind of practice might seem small, but it's actually powerful. Because every time you think in English, even just for a few seconds, you are rewiring your brain. You are teaching it that English is not just a school subject, it's a tool for thought. You are building fluency from the inside out, in a way that no grammar book can give you. And the more you do it, the more natural it becomes. So when people say, thinking in English is only for experts, I challenge that. I've seen absolute beginners start to do it. I've seen shy learners find their voice through it. I've seen people from every walk of life turn this practice into a habit. It's not about being an expert. It's about being curious, brave, and consistent. It's about believing that your mind is capable, even if it feels slow or unsure. Thinking in English is not a reward for fluency. It's a tool for getting there, and it's available to you right now. When people hear the phrase, think in English, they often picture someone speaking super fast, like their thoughts are racing in perfect English sentences, with perfect grammar, perfect words, and no hesitation. But that's not what it really means to think in English. Thinking in English doesn't mean thinking fast. It means thinking directly. It's not a test of speed, but a shift in how your brain processes ideas and connects them to language. And this shift can happen gradually, even if you feel like your English isn't advanced yet. Thinking in English means that when a thought comes to your mind, you allow it to take form in English instead of going through your native language first. For example, if you're walking outside and you feel cold, instead of thinking in your native language and then translating it to I'm cold, your mind naturally says I'm cold right away. It becomes your first instinct. This doesn't require a huge vocabulary or deep grammar knowledge. What it really takes is repeated exposure and a little bit of trust in your brain's ability to adapt. Let's make it very practical. Thinking in English doesn't mean building long, complex sentences in your head. It doesn't mean forming complete paragraphs mentally. It can be as simple as short labels, fragments, or phrases. Coffee. Wake up early. I need my phone. Where is my key? These are natural, everyday thoughts that can easily happen in English. At first, your mind may try to reach for your native language out of habit. But if you gently guide it back to English, again and again, that path becomes easier. Over time, it becomes the default. When I talk about thinking directly, I'm talking about creating a mental shortcut. In traditional learning, a lot of people get used to translating. They hear or read something, understand it in their native language, then look for the English version. Or they want to say something, so they build the sentence in their native language first and then try to translate it into English. This translation step adds time, confusion, and pressure. It also increases the chance of mistakes, especially when the grammar structures don't match. Thinking in English removes that step. You go from thought to English directly, and that saves you precious mental energy, especially during conversations. It's like when you're learning to drive. In the beginning, every movement takes effort. You think about the pedals, the mirrors, the gear shift. But after some time, your body knows what to do. You don't consciously say, now I will check my rearview mirror. It just happens. The same is true with language. At first, thinking in English may feel awkward. You may have to pause and correct yourself, but with consistency, it starts to flow more naturally. It's not about speed, it's about developing automatic patterns of thought in the language. 1. Of the most powerful ways to start thinking in English is by connecting the language to your daily life. When you wake up, instead of thinking, I need to brush my teeth in your native language, try to say it in English, even if it's only in your head. When you're cooking, describe the steps to yourself in English. I'm cutting the tomatoes. Now I add salt. This doesn't require anyone else around. It's your personal space to build fluency silently. And because it's private, you don't have to worry about mistakes or how you sound. The goal is simply to shift your inner voice. Some people ask me, Julia, what if I don't know the English word for something I'm thinking? That's completely normal. In fact, that moment is a learning opportunity. If the word is important, you can look it up and add it to your vocabulary. But if it's not essential, you can simply describe it in other words. This builds your flexibility as a speaker. For example, maybe you don't know the word screwdriver. You can say the tool for screws. That's still thinking in English, even if you're not using the exact word. It's about staying in English mentally and finding a way forward, rather than switching back to your native language. There's also this idea that thinking in English has to sound like textbook sentences. It doesn't. Natural thought is often messy and incomplete. Sometimes it's a single word, sometimes it's just a feeling. And that's okay. You might think tired, hungry, too much work. These are real thoughts, and when they happen in English, they're valuable practice. Over time, your brain starts building longer thoughts around them. I'm tired because I didn't sleep well. Too much work today. I need a break. But it starts with simple words. It's not about forming perfect thoughts. It's about forming real ones, using the language you're learning. I once worked with a learner from Brazil who believed she couldn't think in English because her thoughts were always incomplete. She said, I try, but my English thoughts feel broken, not like real sentences. But I reminded her that her native thoughts aren't always complete either. We all think in fragments sometimes. What matters is that the fragments are happening in English. That's the progress. And with time, those fragments start to link together more smoothly. Her broken thoughts became functional thoughts and eventually fluent ones. Another important thing to understand is that thinking in English helps your listening and speaking at the same time. When you think in English, you start to develop an internal rhythm and tone. You begin to hear the language in your head, which prepares you for real conversations. You become more familiar with sentence patterns, word combinations, and common phrases. That makes it easier to understand what others are saying. It also makes your speech more natural, because you're not constructing sentences under pressure. You've already practiced the rhythm in your mind. There's also a psychological benefit. When you think in English, even a little bit, you begin to see yourself differently. You stop feeling like someone who's just studying English and start feeling like someone who actually lives with the language. That identity shift is powerful. It builds confidence, even when your vocabulary is limited. It changes the way you interact with English. You stop waiting for the perfect conditions. You realize that you can practice anywhere. On the bus, in the kitchen before you go to sleep. Your thoughts are always with you and they become your learning space. A lot of people think, well, I'll think in English once I'm fluent. But in reality, it works the other way around. You get fluent by learning to think in English early on, even with small steps. If you wait until you feel ready, you might never feel ready. But if you start now, today, you'll notice the difference. Even just 5 minutes a day of thinking in English can create change. Describe your morning routine in your head. Think about your plans for the afternoon. Imagine what you would say if someone asked you about your day. These are simple exercises, but they add up. They train your brain to associate English with daily life, not just with textbooks and lessons. So when I say think in English, I'm not asking you to think faster. I'm inviting you to think simpler, more directly, more naturally. I'm inviting you to give your brain the chance to form thoughts without translating. I'm inviting you to trust that even simple English is good English when it reflects your real thoughts. Thinking in English means letting go of fear and choosing to build a new habit, one small thought at a time. It's a quiet process, but it's the foundation for real fluency. One of the most important changes that happens when you're learning to speak a new language, especially English, is the shift from translation to reaction. In the beginning, most of us go through a natural process where we translate everything from our native language into English before speaking. We hear something, we translate it into our own language to understand it. Then we think of what we want to say in our own language and translate that into English before we speak. That process is common, but it creates a lot of delays, frustration, and hesitation. And over time, if we stay in that translation mode, we begin to feel stuck, like we know the words but can't use them fast enough. I've seen so many learners fall into this pattern, and the key to breaking out of it is learning how to shift from translation to direct reaction. This shift doesn't happen all at once. It's a gradual change in how your brain responds to the world around you. At first, you're always catching up. You hear someone speak and your brain goes, wait, what does that mean? Then it works hard to translate and understand. But when you start reacting directly in English, your brain doesn't go through that extra step. It hears the English, it processes it as English, and you respond with English thoughts. The time between input and output gets shorter. That's the key, reducing the pause between the moment you have a thought and the moment you express it. When I first began working with students on this transition, many of them thought it was impossible, unless they were already fluent. They believed that direct reaction was only for native speakers or very advanced learners. But that's not true. Even at a basic level, your brain can begin forming these new pathways. Think about a situation where someone says, "Hi, how are you?" If you're still thinking in your native language, your brain may pause, translate the question, form a reply in your language, and then translate that into English. That whole process might take 3 or 4 seconds. But once your brain starts to understand the phrase, "How are you?" as a single unit, without translation, you can respond almost immediately with something like, "I'm good, thanks, and you?" That's the shift in action. The biggest sign that this shift is happening is when you start speaking without overthinking. You might not even notice it at first. Maybe someone asks you a simple question and you answer quickly. Later you realize, I didn't translate anything. I just replied. That moment is powerful because it shows that your brain is adapting. It's creating a shortcut, a direct path between understanding and speaking, But to build that shortcut, you have to practice it. That means exposing yourself to English in a way that encourages immediate understanding, watching videos without subtitles, listening to podcasts without constantly pausing, repeating phrases out loud as you hear them, shadowing conversations. These are not just exercises in listening, they are exercises in rewiring your brain. You are training it to react instead of translate. And each time you do that, the reaction becomes a little faster, a little more natural. I remember one student from Mexico who used to pause before every sentence. He said he always had the words, but they were stuck behind this wall of translation. Every answer he gave came 2 or 3 seconds late. But after a few weeks of focused training, daily shadowing, short monologues in English, and lots of listening, he started speaking more fluidly. One day he told me, "I don't know how it happened, but now I don't even think before I say some things. They just come out." That's the result of reducing the gap between idea and expression. It's important to understand that this mental shift is not about perfection. You don't need perfect grammar or an advanced vocabulary to react in English. You just need enough familiar words and structures to express your thoughts directly. Even if your sentences are simple, the goal is fluency, not complexity. If you can say, "I'm tired, I need to sleep quickly and naturally," that's far more useful than struggling to say a more advanced sentence that you had to translate. Word by word. Another way to encourage this shift is by changing how you talk to yourself. Internal dialogue is powerful. If you spend your day thinking in your native language and only switch to English when it's time to study or practice, your brain will stay in translation mode. But if you begin narrating parts of your day in English, even quietly or in your head, your brain starts learning to think and react in English more consistently. You might say, "I'm going to the store," or "What should I cook today?" These small phrases train your mind to use English as your first tool for communication, not your second. One technique I often recommend is called reaction drills. These are exercises where you respond to simple prompts quickly and without preparation. For example, I might say, "What's your favorite food?" and you have to respond immediately in English. The goal is not to be correct, it's to answer without translating. Even if your answer is simple like pizza, "I like pizza very much," that's a success. Because your brain found a path directly from the question to the answer, in English, without going through your native language. This shift also helps you deal with unexpected situations. When someone says something you didn't plan for, your brain can panic if it's used to translating everything first. But if you've trained it to react in English, you'll have a better chance of staying in the conversation. You may not understand every word, but your brain is used to staying in English mode, searching for meaning within the language, not outside of it. That makes you more flexible, more confident, and more able to continue communicating even when the situation is unfamiliar. Another benefit of this mental shift is emotional freedom. Many learners tell me they feel anxious when they speak English because they're trying to be perfect. But when you react directly in English, your brain doesn't have time to judge or analyze every word. You just speak. That flow reduces pressure, builds confidence, and actually helps you sound more natural. You become less focused on rules and more focused on connection, which is what real communication is all about. I want to be clear, this shift doesn't mean you'll never translate again. Sometimes, especially with complex topics or new vocabulary, translation can still happen. That's okay. The goal isn't to eliminate translation entirely, but to reduce it as much as possible in daily, familiar situations. The more you react directly in English, the more room your brain has to build fluency. It's like clearing a path in a forest. The more you walk that path, the easier it is to follow. Over time, it becomes the default. And remember, the key is practice. Your brain needs repetition to build new habits. So if you catch yourself translating, don't feel bad. Just gently guide your thoughts back to English. Keep practicing quick reactions. Listen to English daily. Speak out loud, even when you're alone. Describe what you're doing, what you see, what you want. Let your mind become comfortable forming thoughts in English, not just memorizing sentences. That's how the real change happens. Not through force, but through frequent natural use. This mental process of going from translation to reaction is what creates fluency. It's not something that happens overnight, but it does happen. Slowly, the pause between your thoughts and your words becomes smaller. Eventually, it disappears. You think, and you speak directly, naturally. And when that starts happening, everything about your communication in English begins to feel lighter, smoother, and more real. When people think about becoming fluent in English, they often imagine long, complex sentences, advanced vocabulary, and perfect grammar. But real fluency doesn't begin there. It begins with simple thoughts, those short, everyday phrases that form the foundation of natural conversation. When you hear me say something like, "I'm thirsty" or "I need to go," it may sound basic, but these are the exact types of thoughts that we use all the time in daily life. They're easy to understand, quick to say, and deeply useful. That's where fluency starts. Not with complicated words, but with clarity and speed in using the most basic, practical language. I remember when I started helping learners who felt stuck, one of the first things I'd ask them was, "Can you tell me 5 things you did today?" Many of them froze, not because they didn't know the vocabulary, but because they were searching for complex sentences. When I said, "You can say things like, 'I woke up,' 'I brushed my teeth,' 'I had coffee," their faces relaxed. It was like giving them permission to keep it simple. And from there, they started to speak. That's the power of simple thoughts. They open the door to communication. They get you talking. When you focus on phrases like, "I'm hungry," "It's too cold," or "I like this song," you're building automatic responses. These are the kinds of sentences that don't require much thought, but they make you feel more confident because you can use them anytime. The more you use these simple ideas, the faster your brain connects English words with your real-life experiences. You're not just learning a language, you're living it. Every time you say, "I need to sleep," you're telling your brain, "This phrase matters to me, this is part of my life." That connection is what makes the phrase stick. I always encourage learners to start by observing their routines. What are the things you say to yourself throughout the day? When you get up, you might think, "I'm tired," or "Where are my keys?" When you look outside, maybe you think, "It's raining," or "It's a nice day." Those thoughts are perfect practice. They may seem too small to matter, but actually, they are the seeds of fluency. When you learn to express these basic thoughts easily, you create a solid base that supports everything else. Let me give you more examples. Imagine you're getting ready to go out. You might think, "Where's my phone?" or "I have to hurry." On the way, you might say, "The bus is late," "It's hot today," or "I need water." At work or school, you may think, "I forgot my notebook," "I'm busy," or "I need a break." All of these are short, direct thoughts, and they happen all the time. When you train yourself to think and say them in English, you build speed and confidence naturally. You're not translating. You're reacting in real time. That's fluency in its earliest and most powerful form. Some people feel like using simple sentences is a step backwards, especially if they've been studying English for years. They might know complex grammar structures or long words, and they think they should be using them all the time. But the truth is, even native speakers rely heavily on short phrases. If you listen to any real conversation, it's full of them. "I don't know." "Let's go." "Hold on." "Wait a minute." "That's great." "I'm not sure." These expressions are everywhere. They make the language feel natural, and they help the conversation flow. So, instead of skipping them, you should be mastering them. One activity I love doing myself and often suggest is narrating your day using simple English thoughts. As you move through your routine, you can say things out loud or silently in your head. For example, when you wake up, "I don't want to get up, I'm still sleepy." When you're cooking, "I need more salt. This is too hot." When you're cleaning, "Where's the broom?" "I hate doing dishes." These phrases might feel basic, but they bring English into your personal space. They turn the language from something academic into something lived and felt. Another great exercise is using flashcards with simple thoughts. Instead of writing vocabulary words, write full phrases that you would actually use. "I have no time." "I'm on my way." "This is mine." "I don't like it." "Tell me later." "Call me back." Practicing these repeatedly gives your brain the chance to make quick, direct connections between your thoughts and the English language. It also reduces hesitation. You don't need to search for words or build a sentence from scratch. The phrase is already there, ready to use. What I've noticed with many learners is that once they become comfortable with simple thoughts, their confidence grows. They start talking more because the fear of making mistakes decreases. When your sentences are short, there's less room for error. And even if there is a mistake, the listener still understands you. That positive feedback loop builds motivation. You speak, you're understood, and you want to keep going. You begin to believe, I can do this. Also, don't underestimate how much these small phrases can express emotion. When you say, I'm bored, or this is fun, you're sharing your feelings clearly and naturally. That emotional connection helps you feel more connected to the language. It also makes your conversations more meaningful. People connect through shared experiences, and often, those experiences are described through simple language. Saying, I'm tired after a long day, or that's funny during a good moment, connects you with others in a very real way. The more you practice these types of phrases, the more you'll start combining them into longer expressions. I'm tired becomes, I'm tired because I didn't sleep well. I need coffee becomes, I need coffee before my meeting. These small expansions happen naturally as your comfort grows. You don't need to force them. They come from repetition and familiarity. That's why the foundation matters so much. Without a strong base of simple, clear thoughts, longer sentences feel shaky. But when the base is strong, everything else becomes easier. What I want you to take away is that short thoughts are not a weakness. They are the strongest, most effective tool you have to build fluency. They help you speak without fear, understand without translating, and connect without hesitation. When you master these everyday phrases, you start to think in English automatically. And once that starts, the journey becomes much smoother. You'll be surprised at how far simple thoughts can take you. When I think about the process of becoming fluent in English, I often imagine it as building a bridge between your thoughts and your words. In the beginning, that bridge is fragile, maybe just a few planks placed over a stream. You have to walk slowly. You're careful with every step. Each word you use feels like a decision. You think, translate, check if it's right, then speak. It's a long walk for a short sentence. But over time, if you keep building, that fragile path becomes something stronger, more stable. Eventually, the bridge allows you to cross smoothly, without thinking about every step. That's what fluency really is. Your thoughts flowing directly into words without hesitation. I remember talking to a student named Elisa. She was from Italy and had been learning English for years. She knew grammar rules and vocabulary, but when it came time to speak, she froze. She told me, I know what I want to say, but it feels like the words are stuck. That's because her bridge was still under construction. She had all the pieces, but they weren't connected well yet. So we started working with small phrases, simple sentences, and exercises to connect her ideas directly to English words. After some time, the pauses became shorter. The words came faster. She was still the same person, but the bridge was finally holding her weight. This metaphor of the bridge isn't just something poetic. It's a real way of understanding what's happening in your brain. At first, your thoughts are in your native language, and there's a big gap before you can express them in English. You look for translations. You check grammar in your head. You feel unsure. That's the gap, the space between thought and expression. But every time you practice thinking directly in English, you're laying down new planks. You're connecting ideas more quickly. You're reinforcing the bridge so it doesn't break under pressure. What's interesting is that even people who have been studying English for years sometimes haven't built this bridge completely. They've memorized vocabulary and studied the rules, but they haven't practiced the transition between thoughts and speech. They've trained themselves to be careful instead of fluent. And I get it. You want to be correct. You want to sound smart. But fluency doesn't grow in cautious silence. It grows in movement, in crossing that bridge again and again until the path feels natural. There's a phase that every learner goes through where speaking feels mechanical. You're trying to get everything right. It's like building the bridge while you're walking on it. You say something, realize it's not quite right, try again, and feel frustrated. That's part of the process. It's not a sign that you're failing. It's a sign that you're doing the hard work of connection. With each attempt, your mind becomes faster at choosing the right words. Your instincts start to guide you. That's when the shift happens, from careful thinking to more automatic speaking. I often tell people, you don't need to be perfect to be fluent. You need to be fluent to get better. In other words, the more you use the bridge, the stronger. it becomes. Waiting until you're sure you'll say everything perfectly only delays your progress. Instead, speak with what you know. Let the bridge wobble. Let it shake. Over time, it will stabilize. The more often you cross from your thoughts to your words, the easier it becomes. Your brain learns to skip unnecessary steps. It starts recognizing patterns and builds confidence from experience. One of the things that helps strengthen this mental bridge is repetition with variation. For example, take a simple thought like, I need water. Now say it in different ways. I'm thirsty. Can I have some water? I want a drink. Is there any water here? Each time you express the same idea in a new way, you're building different paths across the same bridge. You're telling your brain, there's more than one way to get across. That flexibility makes your fluency more natural. It frees you from having to find the perfect sentence and lets you focus on communicating your message. Another strategy is shadowing, repeating what you hear immediately after someone else says it. You can do this with movies, podcasts, or even conversations. It trains your brain to link sounds and meanings instantly. Think of it as walking across a bridge that someone else just built, then learning how to build your own. It removes the pause between input and output. You hear something, then immediately repeat it. No time for translation, no time for doubt, just reaction. That builds speed and confidence. I also like to encourage learners to talk to themselves during the day, narrating their actions in English. If you're making tea, say, I'm boiling water. I need a cup. Where's the spoon? These small, private moments are where the real bridge building happens. Nobody's watching. There's no pressure. You're just connecting. Your thoughts to your words again and again in real time. The more you do this, the more automatic it becomes. And before long, you'll notice that you're thinking in English without even trying. There's something very satisfying about feeling your brain get faster. I remember one learner telling me that after a few months of practicing simple sentences, she was surprised to find herself dreaming in English. That's a beautiful sign that the bridge is working even when you're not awake. It means the connection is deep enough that your mind no longer sees English as foreign. It sees it as part of your thinking. This process can feel invisible. You don't always notice the bridge being built. One day you struggle to find the right words, and the next day they come more easily. It's gradual but powerful. That's why it's so important to be consistent. Even 5 minutes a day of intentional practice helps reinforce the path. Every thought you connect to an English phrase is like laying another stone on your bridge. And those small steps add up. You're not just learning to speak a language, you're rewiring your brain to think differently. And that takes time. It takes patience. But most of all, it takes movement. Don't stand on one side of the bridge forever, looking across and wishing you could get to the other side. Take a step. Say something. Let it be simple. Let it be messy. Just don't stop moving. The only way to build that bridge is to walk across it again and again, until one day you realize you're already there. When I think about the most natural way to learn a language, I always go back to one of the most powerful examples we have, children. Children don't study grammar rules, they don't worry about speaking with perfect pronunciation, and they certainly don't sit in classrooms taking notes. And yet, by the time they are 3 or 4 years old, they can understand and communicate in complete sentences. They do this not through memorization or pressure, but through exposure, repetition, and constant interaction with the language around them. This process teaches us a lot about how adults can approach learning English in a more natural and effective way. Children are surrounded by language from the moment they are born. They hear people talking to them, around them, and about them. There's no expectation that they respond immediately. In fact, they go through months, sometimes over a year, just listening before they begin to speak. But during that time, their brains are actively absorbing the rhythm, the sounds, the patterns of the language. They hear, "Where's your toy?" and "Are you hungry?" dozens of times in real situations, and their brains begin to connect those sounds with meanings. When they finally speak, it's not because they've decided it's time, it's because the language has become so familiar, it just comes out naturally. Now think about how most adults learn English. Often, it starts with textbooks and grammar exercises. You're expected to produce correct sentences from day one. There's pressure to speak without making mistakes. But that's not how we learned our first language. There was no pressure. Nobody told you, don't speak unless it's perfect. Instead, your mistakes were part of the process. People around you repeated words with patience. They celebrated your efforts, not just your accuracy. That freedom to explore and fail is one of the most important things children have, and something we often lose as adults. What children also teach us is the power of repetition in real contexts. A child doesn't hear a new word once and immediately use it. They hear it again and again, sometimes in slightly different ways. Do you want juice? Here's your juice. Drink your juice. The meaning becomes clear not through explanation, but through consistent exposure in natural situations. This is something we can apply as adult learners too. Watching shows, listening to conversations, repeating phrases in daily life. These are powerful tools. When you hear, "I'm coming," or "let's go" in different situations, those phrases start to feel natural. They move from being words you recognize to words you actually use. Another thing that strikes me about children is that they aren't self-conscious. They don't hesitate before speaking because they're afraid of judgment. They just speak. And when they make mistakes, people don't laugh. They support them. That lack of fear is what allows them to practice so much. They don't wait until they're perfect. They start with what they have. That's a huge lesson for us. I've met so many learners who say, "I'm afraid to speak because I'll sound silly." But children sound silly all the time, and that's how they learn. If we can let go of that fear, even just a little, we open the door to real growth. Exposure, repetition, and freedom to experiment are more important than studying from a book. That doesn't mean grammar and vocabulary don't have their place. They absolutely do. But the core of language learning is communication. And that's something children practice all day long. They listen, they try, they repeat. Not in a classroom, but in the world around them. If we want to follow their example, we need to create an environment where English is a part of our everyday lives, not just something we study once a week. I remember observing a little boy named Diego. His parents spoke Spanish at home, but he was attending a school where English was the main language. At first, he said nothing. For weeks, he just listened. His teachers didn't pressure him. They just kept speaking to him, including him in activities, letting him participate in his own way. One day, while playing with blocks, Diego suddenly said, "I make a big tower." It wasn't perfect English, but it was clear and natural. Nobody had taught him that sentence directly. He had absorbed it from hearing similar phrases over and over. That moment reminded me how effective this kind of learning can be. It may be slow at the start, but when it clicks, it's solid. Adults sometimes say, "But I'm not a child anymore. It's harder now." Yes, our brains do change as we grow older, but that doesn't mean we can't learn like children do. We just need to recreate some of the conditions that made learning natural: listening often, speaking without fear, using language in daily situations, and allowing ourselves to repeat things until they feel easy. Instead of focusing only on tests or memorizing lists, we can spend more time listening to stories, mimicking sentences, talking to ourselves in English, or labeling objects around the house. These small habits can bring the language into your life in a more organic way. When I started helping learners with English, I noticed that those who progressed the most weren't necessarily the ones who studied the hardest. They were the ones who played with the language. They were curious. They watched cartoons in English. They repeated what they heard in songs. They laughed at their own mistakes. Just like children, they were learning through joy, not pressure. That's a mindset we can all adopt. Language isn't just about knowledge, it's about connection. And connection starts with exposure and practice, not perfection. One of my favorite things to do with students is encourage them to build a language bubble. That means surrounding yourself with as much English as possible, even if you're not actively studying. Listening to podcasts while walking, changing your phone language settings, watching short videos during lunch, these small exposures add up. They help your brain see English not as a subject, but as something normal. Just like a child learns. From hearing the same bedtime story again and again, you can learn from repetition in your own daily routine. And don't underestimate the power of imitation. Children learn by copying. They imitate tone, rhythm, gestures. They don't understand everything at once, but they repeat anyway. That's why shadowing exercises are so powerful. When you hear a sentence and say it aloud right after, Even if you don't fully understand every word, you're training your mouth, your ear, and your brain. It's physical, mental, and emotional learning all at once. And the more you do it, the more fluent you become, not just in vocabulary, but in the rhythm and feeling of the language. I've also seen the value of unstructured play in language learning. When children play, they don't plan every word. They react. They improvise. You can do the same thing by writing a short story in English just for fun, or by talking to yourself in the mirror, or by describing everything you do while cooking. These moments feel small, but they build fluency because they remove pressure. When there's no test, no judgment, your brain can focus on expressing ideas, not on being correct. Children teach us that learning a language is not a race. It's a process of immersion, repetition, and experimentation. They don't wait for permission to use the language. They don't ask if they're ready. They dive in, they get it wrong, they try again, and slowly, over time, the language becomes theirs. We can do the same. We just have to give ourselves the same space, the same patience, and the same joy in learning. When I talk about learning English, one thing I always emphasize is the importance of creating a safe space for mistakes. I want you to imagine your mind as a playground, a place where you can explore, experiment, and even fall without fear. So often, learners feel trapped by the idea that they have to be perfect, or that making a mistake means they have failed. But the truth is, mistakes are not only normal, they are essential. They are the stepping stones to progress. When you shift your mindset to see your mind as a playground, a place without judgment, suddenly learning becomes less stressful and much more fun. I want you to picture this. When children play, they don't worry about doing things right on the first try. They throw a ball, sometimes they miss. They try to climb a slide, sometimes they slip. But they keep trying, because play is about discovery, not perfection. Learning a language should be exactly the same. Your thoughts, your attempts to speak, your writing, none of it has to be perfect right away. This is your playground where you are free to try, to stumble, and to get up again. It's a place where you can test new words, new sentence structures, new sounds, and learn what works and what doesn't. There is no judgment here, only learning. One of the biggest hurdles I see learners face is the fear of making mistakes. This fear can freeze you. It stops you from speaking, from trying new words, from experimenting with the language. But when you think about your mind as a safe space, you realize that mistakes aren't something to avoid. They are something to welcome. They show you where you need to grow. For example, when you try to say a sentence and it doesn't come out quite right, instead of feeling embarrassed, you can think, okay, now I know what I need to work on. This mindset takes the pressure off and turns mistakes into useful information. Let me tell you a story about one of my students, Maria. Maria was very shy and afraid of speaking English because she thought she would make mistakes and people would judge her. But I encouraged her to see her practice sessions as a kind of playground. When you allow yourself this freedom, you also start to understand that language is fluid and flexible. It's not about rigid perfection, but about communication. When you speak, your goal is to express your ideas, and sometimes that means your grammar might be a bit off or your pronunciation isn't perfect. And that's okay. People are usually patient and appreciate the effort more than perfect language. What matters is that you keep trying. Your mind as a playground lets you experiment with different ways of saying the same thing, so you discover what feels natural to you. You learn to play with the language, not just memorize it. This idea of your mind as a safe space also applies to how you think in English. When you start to practice thinking in English, your brain needs time to adjust. You might catch yourself making mistakes in your thoughts or mixing up words. Instead of getting frustrated, remind yourself that this is your mental playground. It's the place where your brain is learning to organize ideas in a new language. Each mistake is like a small bump on a slide that helps you learn how to go down more smoothly next time. Your thoughts will become clearer, your responses faster, and your confidence stronger when you accept that mistakes are part of the process. I also encourage you to test different ways of expressing yourself in English. Maybe you say something one way today and tomorrow you try a different phrase. Maybe you experiment with new vocabulary, or try speaking about topics you haven't tried before. Your mind as a playground means that you have the freedom to play with these options. Adjust your approach and find what works best for you. Learning isn't about copying a perfect model. It's about making the language your own. And that requires a mindset where mistakes are welcome, not feared. Another important part of this safe space is self-compassion. Often, learners are their own harshest critics. When you make a mistake, you might think, I'm not good enough, or I'm never going to get this. But that kind of thinking doesn't help you learn. Instead, try to treat yourself like you would a good friend who is learning something new. Be patient. Be encouraging. Remind yourself that everyone who ever learned a language made mistakes. Everyone. Your mind as a playground needs kindness and support, not criticism. When you give yourself that, you open the door to faster learning and more enjoyment. Practicing in this judgment-free zone also means you can try speaking aloud, even if you're alone. Talk to yourself in English, narrate what you're doing, or describe what you see. In this private playground, you can test words and sentences without fear. You might stumble over a phrase or forget a word, but that's part of the fun. You're playing with the language, discovering it, and building your confidence. This private practice is one of the most powerful tools you have because it allows your brain to practice without any pressure from outside. The way you view mistakes has a direct impact on your learning speed and confidence. When mistakes feel like failures, learning slows down. When mistakes feel like playful experiments, learning speeds up. Your mind as a playground is the mindset that supports risk-taking, curiosity, and resilience. It helps you build fluency, naturally, because you're constantly testing and adjusting, rather than freezing up out of fear. So, when you speak, write, or think in English, give yourself permission to make mistakes. Celebrate them as signs that you are learning, growing, and moving forward. I often remind my students that fluency isn't about never making mistakes. It's about being able to recover and continue communicating despite them. The best speakers in the world make mistakes too. What makes them fluent is their ability to keep going, to learn from those moments, and to enjoy the process. Your mind as a playground gives you the freedom to do exactly that. So whenever you catch yourself hesitating, because you're afraid to make a mistake, take a deep breath and remind yourself, this is your safe space. This is your playground. Here, you are free to explore, experiment, and most importantly, learn. When I talk about improving your English, one of the most effective ways I always recommend is to start thinking in English during your daily routines. You might be surprised how many opportunities you have throughout the day to practice your English thinking skills without needing extra time or special resources. The key is to use the moments you already have, whether you're cooking, walking, or simply observing your surroundings, and turn them into language practice. This kind of practice feels natural because it fits right into your life, and it doesn't require you to sit down and study for hours. Instead, it becomes part of what you already do, which makes it easier to stay consistent. Let's start with cooking. When you are in the kitchen preparing a meal, this is a perfect time to think in English. As you wash the vegetables, you can say in your mind, I'm washing the carrots, or the onions smell strong. When you chop, you can think about the shapes and colors. I'm cutting small pieces, or the tomatoes are red and fresh. If you follow a recipe, you can translate the instructions into English as you go. For example, add 2 cups of water, or cook for 10 minutes. By narrating what you do in English, you train your brain to connect everyday actions with English vocabulary and sentence structures. This kind of practical exercise helps you build associations between real-life experiences and the language, which is essential for fluent thinking. Walking is another wonderful opportunity to practice thinking in English. As you move, observe your environment and describe what you see. For instance, the sky is blue today, or there are many cars on the street. You can also use this time to think about your feelings or plans in English, such as, I feel tired but happy, or I'm going to visit my friend later. Walking gives you a chance to engage your mind actively without the pressure of conversation. It's a private moment where you can practice freely. If you're in a park, you might notice the birds singing or the leaves falling and think, the birds are singing beautifully, or the leaves are yellow and orange. These small observations create a habit of thinking in English naturally and regularly. Observing your surroundings doesn't have to be limited to walks or cooking. You can practice while waiting in line, sitting on public transport, or even during breaks at work. The key is to use your inner voice in English to describe what's happening or what you're feeling. For example, if you're waiting for the bus, you might think, "The bus is late today," or "There are many people waiting." When you're sitting in a cafe, you can observe the sounds and smells around you. The coffee smells good, or people are talking loudly. By paying attention and mentally labeling your experiences in English, you are training your brain to switch from your native language to English more easily. This reduces the habit of translating in your head and helps you think directly in English. It's important to remember that you don't have to use complicated sentences or perfect grammar during these exercises. The goal is to get comfortable with thinking in English, even if your sentences are short or simple. For example, "I'm hungry," or "It's cold outside" are perfectly fine. Over time, as you practice more, your thoughts will naturally become more complex and fluent. Starting with simple phrases builds a strong foundation. I often tell my students that the first step is just to talk to yourself in English in any way that feels easy and natural. Don't worry about making mistakes or sounding robotic. This is your private time to experiment. Another tip is to use questions during these daily thinking moments. Asking yourself questions in English helps activate your mind and encourages you to respond mentally. For instance, when you're cooking, you might ask, "What should I add next?" Or, "Is the soup hot enough?" When you're walking, try questions like, "Where am I going?" or "What will I do after this?" This question and answer format mimics real conversation and helps prepare your brain for actual speaking situations. The more you practice these mental dialogues, the more automatic English thinking becomes. You can also try to predict what's going to happen next in your day in English. For example, "After I finish cooking, I will eat dinner," or "When I get home, I will watch a movie." Thinking ahead in English helps you organize your thoughts in the language and links your daily activities with English expressions. This is an excellent way to connect your life and your learning seamlessly. Using daily routines for English thinking practice also means you don't have to feel guilty for not studying extra hours. Sometimes learners think that if they're not sitting with a textbook or attending a class, they're not really learning. But that's not true. Your mind can work on English continuously when you engage it actively in everyday moments. This makes your practice more natural, less forced, and more sustainable over time. You start to live English as part of your day, rather than something separate and difficult. Consistency is the secret here. If you make it a habit to think in English during daily activities, your brain will adjust gradually. At first, it might feel strange or slow, but with practice, it will become faster and more natural. You'll find that you can express your thoughts more easily, and speaking will feel less like a challenge and more like a natural extension of your thinking process. Lastly, I want to encourage you to be patient with yourself during these exercises. Sometimes your mind will drift back to your native language, and that's perfectly normal. The important thing is to gently bring your thoughts back to English whenever you notice. This is a skill that takes time to develop, but the more you practice, the easier it gets. Your daily routines are a wonderful playground for this kind of practice because they happen every day and provide endless material to think about. Start small, start now. When you're cooking, start describing your actions in English. When you walk, start observing and narrating what you see. When you wait or rest, start labeling your feelings or surroundings in English. These small, consistent steps will build your confidence and help you develop the habit of thinking in English naturally. This is how your brain learns to switch from translation to direct thinking, and it's one of the most practical and effective exercises you can do on your language learning journey. When I talk about learning English, one of the most important things I always emphasize is the value of consistency over intensity. It's easy to get caught up in the idea that we need to spend hours every day studying English, pushing ourselves hard to improve quickly. But the truth is, small doses of practice done regularly often lead to much better results than occasional, intense study sessions. This might sound surprising if you're used to thinking that more time automatically means faster progress. However, I've seen so many learners struggle because they try to do too much at once and end up feeling overwhelmed or burnt out. The secret to real, lasting improvement is building tiny habits that you can maintain every single day, no matter how busy or tired you feel. When you practice English in small, manageable chunks every day, you create a routine that becomes part of your life. These tiny moments of practice don't have to be perfect or complicated. For example, just spending 5 minutes thinking in English before you go to bed or describing your breakfast out loud in English while you eat can make a difference. The key is that these habits are sustainable. They don't demand huge blocks of time or intense focus, but they keep your brain engaged with English consistently. This steady exposure helps you build and reinforce connections in your mind, making your English skills stronger over time. The idea of consistency over intensity also means you don't have to feel pressured to do everything perfectly every day. Some days you might only manage a few minutes of practice, and that's completely okay. Other days you might feel motivated and spend a bit more time. The important thing is that you keep coming back to English regularly. It's the habit of returning to the language that counts, not the length or intensity of each session. This way, you avoid the common trap of binge studying, where you work very hard for a few days but then stop for a long time because you're exhausted or discouraged. Let me share a story about one of my students, Anna. She told me that when she started learning English, she thought she had to study for hours every day to get better. But she quickly became tired and frustrated, and she almost gave up. Then she tried something different. Anna began to spend just 10 minutes every morning practicing simple phrases and listening to a short English podcast. She didn't worry about grammar rules or vocabulary lists at first. She focused on just staying connected to English. Over a few months, Anna noticed she was understanding more, speaking more confidently, and most importantly, she felt motivated to keep going, because the practice didn't feel like a chore. This story is a perfect example of how small, consistent efforts beat occasional intense study sessions. Another thing I love about tiny habits is that they fit into your life no matter how busy it is. You can practice English while commuting, cooking, waiting in line, or even brushing your teeth. For instance, when you're brushing your teeth, you might think of 5 English words related to your day, or repeat a simple phrase like, "I am brushing my teeth." When you're on the bus or subway, you can listen to a short English song or repeat vocabulary silently. These small actions don't take much time or energy, but when done every day, they add up to a huge amount of practice. This approach makes language learning feel natural and fun, rather than something extra you have to force yourself to do. Building tiny habits also helps you overcome the feeling of being stuck or overwhelmed. Sometimes learners get discouraged because they look at all the things they still need to learn and feel like it's impossible to reach their goals. When you focus on consistency instead of intensity, you break the learning process into manageable steps. You build confidence by mastering little things every day. These small wins motivate you to keep going and eventually lead to big improvements. It's like climbing a mountain one small step at a time instead of trying to jump to the top all at once. I also want to talk about the power of habit in your brain. When you do something repeatedly, your brain creates neural pathways that make the task easier and more automatic. This is why consistent practice feels less effortful over time and why habits are so powerful. The more you expose yourself to English daily, even for a few minutes, the more natural it becomes to think, speak, and understand it. This process can't be rushed, but it doesn't require huge bursts of effort either. It just needs your commitment to showing up every day, even if it's just a little bit. Many learners feel discouraged because they expect quick results and compare themselves to fluent speakers who have been learning for years. But the reality is that fluency is a journey made up of many small, consistent steps. When you focus on tiny habits, you shift your mindset from, "I need to be perfect now," to "I am improving every day." This mindset reduces anxiety and makes learning more enjoyable. It also helps you celebrate your progress, no matter how small it seems. For example, remembering 5 new words today or thinking in English for 5 minutes might feel minor, but it's a sign that you're building a strong foundation. One practical way to create tiny habits is to attach your English practice to something you already do regularly. For example, after you brush your teeth in the morning, spend 1 minute thinking of 5 things in English that describe your day. Or while waiting for your coffee to brew, say a short English phrase out loud. Linking practice to existing routines helps you remember to do it without extra effort. Over time, this becomes automatic, and you don't even have to think about it consciously. This technique, called habit stacking, is a great way to make English practice effortless and consistent. It's also important to keep your practice varied to stay motivated. Tiny habits don't mean you have to repeat the same thing every day. You can switch between listening to a short podcast, reading a few sentences, thinking aloud, or writing a simple journal entry in English. The variety keeps your brain engaged and makes practice more enjoyable. But no matter what activity you choose, the focus should be on doing it regularly, not doing it perfectly. In my own experience, I've found that tiny, consistent habits made a huge difference in my language learning journey. When I was learning other languages, the moments when I practiced daily, even just for a few minutes, were the times I improved the most. The small actions, repeated over weeks and months, helped me build confidence and fluency gradually. I believe this is true for all language learners, and I encourage you to trust the process and focus on building these tiny habits. They might seem small now, but they have the power to transform your English skills in the long run. Remember, learning English is not about racing to finish a checklist or mastering everything quickly. It's about creating a sustainable path where you enjoy the journey and make steady progress. Tiny habits are your secret weapon for this. By committing to small, consistent doses of practice every day, you're investing in your future fluency. This approach respects your time, energy, and life's demands, while helping you move forward in your English learning with confidence and joy. One of the most powerful changes I've noticed in myself and my students when they start thinking in English is how much their confidence improves. It's not just about speaking more correctly or knowing every grammar rule perfectly. It's about feeling connected to the language in a way that allows you to express yourself freely, without that heavy weight of fear or hesitation. When you think in English, something shifts inside you. The focus moves away from worrying about every little mistake and moves toward sharing your thoughts, ideas, and feelings. This shift changes everything in your language learning journey because confidence opens doors to real conversations and genuine connections. Let me explain why this happens. When you translate in your mind before speaking, your brain is working overtime. You're constantly double-checking. Is this word correct? Is my sentence right? Did I say that properly? All this self-editing creates a mental barrier, and it slows you down. It makes speaking feel stressful and less natural. But when you start thinking directly in English, your brain can respond more quickly and smoothly. You don't have to pause to translate or second-guess yourself. This ease in thinking translates directly to ease in speaking, and that ease builds confidence. Suddenly, you feel less worried about making mistakes because your brain is already in the right language mode, allowing you to focus on what you want to say, not how to say it perfectly. Another beautiful effect of thinking in English is that your focus shifts from correctness to expression. Instead of obsessing over grammar rules or pronunciation, your mind starts prioritizing communication. This is where real language learning happens. It's in the act of sharing your unique ideas, telling your stories, and connecting with others that you truly grow. When your goal is to express yourself, you become more relaxed and creative with your language use. You might make mistakes, but those mistakes no longer feel like failures. They are stepping stones. Each attempt, whether perfect or imperfect, is a chance to learn, improve, and feel more comfortable in your English skin. I remember when I first started thinking in English regularly. Before that, I used to be very self-conscious about my accent and grammar mistakes. I worried a lot about being judged or misunderstood. But once I trained my brain to think in English, I noticed that these worries began to fade. Instead, I felt excited to speak because I was no longer stuck in my head trying to correct everything. I could focus on sharing my thoughts and emotions. That joy and freedom completely transformed my relationship with English. I want you to experience that same freedom and confidence because it makes the learning process much more enjoyable and effective. Thinking in English also helps you connect more deeply with the culture and the people who speak the language. When your thoughts flow naturally in English, you start understanding jokes, expressions, and nuances that are often lost in translation. This connection enriches your learning and makes conversations more meaningful. You begin to see English not just as a subject to study, but as a living, breathing language that you can use to connect with the world. This connection builds your confidence further because you're not just repeating memorized phrases. You're engaging with real people, real ideas, and real situations. If you're someone who has struggled with speaking English confidently, I want you to know that thinking in English can be your game changer. It's a skill that you can develop with practice, and it's accessible to everyone. You don't need to be perfect or speak like a native right away. What matters is that you start training your brain to use English as the language of your brain. Thoughts. Start with simple sentences, describe your surroundings, talk to yourself silently in English during daily tasks. With time, you'll notice that your ability to speak confidently will grow naturally because your mind and mouth are finally working together smoothly. I encourage you to be patient with yourself in this process. Confidence is not something that appears overnight, but it grows steadily as you create stronger connections between your thoughts and words. Celebrate every moment you successfully think in English, even if it's just for a few seconds. Each time you do this, you're reinforcing your ability to speak freely and confidently. Remember, the goal is to enjoy the process and feel proud of your progress, not to be perfect. If this idea of building confidence through thinking in English resonates with you, I invite you to take the next step today. Try to catch yourself when you're translating in your head and gently remind yourself to switch to thinking directly in English. Practice this during simple daily routines like walking, cooking, or even waiting in line. Over time, this simple habit will make a big difference in how you feel about speaking English. Before you go, I want to thank you for being part of our community here at the English Talk community. Your journey is unique and your efforts are inspiring. If you found this video helpful, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and leave a like so we can keep creating content that supports your English learning journey. Also, share your thoughts in the comments. Tell me about your own experiences with confidence or what challenges you face when speaking English. I read every message and love hearing from you. Now that you've learned why thinking in English is so powerful for building confidence, I encourage you to keep practicing and keep believing in yourself. The more you connect with English as your language of thought, the more confident and natural your speech will become. Keep going, and remember, your voice matters. Keep speaking, keep thinking, and keep growing.